After 40 years on this bench, I thought I had seen everything. But one Tuesday morning in October, an elderly woman walked into my courtroom carrying a manila envelope full of parking tickets, and what she told me about what happened to her made my blood boil. Her car had been stolen, used in crimes she knew nothing about, and yet the city kept sending her violation after violation. What I did next, the decision I made right there in front of everyone, it's something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day, because this is a story about justice, about bureaucracy gone wrong, and about what happens when the system forgets there are real human beings behind every case number. But before I tell you this whole story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a municipal court judge in Providence, Rhode Island, for 40 years now. Every morning I wake up at 6, make myself a strong cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and I read the Providence Journal while the sun comes up over the city. My father came to this country from Italy with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. He worked in construction, broke his back building the buildings that still stand in this city today. He taught me something I've never forgotten. He said, "Frankie, the law is the only thing that makes a poor man equal to a rich man. Respect it. Serve it. Never forget who you're serving." I took that lesson with me to law school through my years as an attorney, and onto this bench where I've sat since 1985. Every single day, I put on these robes knowing that someone's going to walk through that door who needs justice, who needs compassion, who needs someone to actually listen to their story.
Buckle up, guys. Today we're going to witness a courtroom moment that cuts straight to the heart of justice. A veteran judge opens up about a case that shook him after decades on the bench, teasing a story of bureaucracy gone wrong, an elderly woman buried under violations, and a decision he would never forget. From the very first minutes, it's clear this isn't just about tickets, but about what happens when the system forgets the people it's supposed to serve.
That's what I try to do. I try to see the person, not just the case number. That particular morning started like any other Tuesday. I got to the courthouse at 8:15, same as always. My clerk, Christina, she's been with me for 23 years now. She had my coffee waiting on my desk, exactly how I like it. She knows me better than I know myself sometimes. I was going through my case files for the day, nothing too unusual. A few parking violations, some traffic citations, a noise complaint, standard Tuesday morning stuff. Christina came into my chambers around 9. She had this look on her face, the one she gets when something's bothering her. I looked up from my papers and I said, "What's wrong?" She handed me a file and she said, "Judge, you need to look at this one before she comes in." I opened it up and I saw the name, Dorothy Jensen, 73 years old. The charges were extensive. 12 parking violations over a 3-month period, 2 moving violations, 1 citation for a vehicle being present at a crime scene. I looked at Christina and I said, "What's the story here?" She told me what she knew. Mrs. Jensen had been trying to fight these tickets for months. She'd written letters to the parking authority, to the police department, to the mayor's office. Nobody would listen to her. She'd called Christina's office 4 times asking for a court date. She wanted her day in court. She wanted someone to hear her out. I felt something.
The judge reflects on his background, his father's lessons about fairness, and the responsibility he feels every time he puts on the robe. He explains how his daily routine and decades of experience shaped his instinct to look beyond case numbers. This grounding sets the stage for why this particular Tuesday morning, which began like any other, would soon feel very different.
Stir in my chest, that old familiar feeling I get when I sense an injustice. I said to Christina, "Let's make sure we give her all the time she needs today." At 9:30, I walked into my courtroom. I could see it was already filling up with people waiting for their cases to be called. I saw Mrs. Jensen right away. She was sitting in the front row, clutching that manila envelope to her chest like it contained her life savings. She was a small woman, couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, with white hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a floral dress and a cardigan sweater, even though it was warm outside. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held that envelope. I sat down at my bench and I took a moment to just observe her. In 40 years, you develop an instinct about people. You can see things in their faces, in the way they carry themselves. I could see fear in her eyes, but I could also see determination. This was a woman who had been pushed around by the system, but she wasn't going to go down without a fight. I respected that immediately. I went through a few other cases first, standard stuff, nothing memorable. But the whole time I kept glancing over at Mrs. Jensen. She sat perfectly still, waiting patiently, that envelope never leaving her hands. Finally, around 10:15, Christina called her case. She said, case number 2019 CV847, City of Providence versus Dorothy Jensen, multiple parking and moving violations. I watched as Mrs. Jensen...
As the courtroom fills, the judge notices an elderly woman sitting quietly in the front row, clutching a manila envelope. Even before her case is called, her posture and expression stand out. From an observer's view, the tension builds as it becomes clear she has been waiting patiently, carrying not just paperwork, but months of frustration and fear.
Stood up slowly. She walked to the front with careful steps, like someone whose knees don't work quite as well as they used to. She stood before my bench, and when she looked up at me, I saw tears already forming in her eyes. I softened my voice. I said, "Good morning, Mrs. Jensen. I'm Judge Caprio. I want you to know you can take your time here today. I'm listening. Tell me what's been going on." She took a deep breath, and her voice came out shaky at first. She said, "Your Honor, I don't know what to do anymore. Nobody will listen to me. I've tried everything." Her hands were trembling so badly that the envelope shook. I said, "It's okay. Start from the beginning. Tell me what happened." She composed herself and began her story. She told me that on July 22nd, about 3 months earlier, she had parked her car on the street outside her apartment building, like she did every night. It was a 2004 Honda Civic, light blue, nothing fancy. She'd owned it for 15 years. She'd bought it used with money she'd saved from her job as a school cafeteria worker. The next morning, she woke up to go to her job at the grocery store, where she worked part-time, and her car was gone. I leaned forward, listening carefully. She continued. She said she immediately called the police to report it stolen. They took her information, gave her a case number, told her they'd look for it. She filed a report with her insurance company. She did everything she was supposed to do. Days went by.
When her case is finally called, the woman approaches the bench and begins explaining that her car was stolen months earlier. She describes reporting it immediately and believing the ordeal was over, only to start receiving parking tickets weeks later. The calm courtroom starts to feel heavier as each detail confirms something has gone seriously wrong.
10 weeks. She heard nothing. She had to take the bus to work, had to ask her daughter to drive her to church on Sundays. She missed her car, but she figured it was gone for good, probably chopped up in some warehouse somewhere. Then, about 3 weeks after it was stolen, she started getting parking tickets in the mail. She opened that envelope and pulled out the first one. She held it up with shaking hands. She said, "Your Honor, this ticket says my car was parked illegally downtown on August 10th at 2 in the morning. I was asleep in my bed. I haven't had my car since July 22nd. It was stolen. I looked at the ticket she was showing me, and I felt my jaw tighten." She pulled out another one, and another, and another. She spread them out on the table in front of me like a deck of cards. She said, "I got 12 of these, 12 tickets for a car I don't even have. And then I got this." She pulled out a citation for a moving violation, running a red light camera. She said, "This is from August 15th at 3 in the morning in a part of town I've never even been to. And this one." She pulled out another document. "My car was apparently parked outside a building where there was a drug arrest. Now the police are saying my vehicle was involved in criminal activity." I felt the anger rising in my chest. I picked up each document and examined them carefully. Every single one was addressed to Dorothy Jensen. Every single one was for her vehicle, her license plate number. Every single one demanded payment. The fines totaled over $1,800. I looked up at her and I said,
One by one, she lays the tickets out in front of the judge. Illegal parking, red light violations, even a citation linking her car to a crime scene. All were issued while she was home asleep. From the outside, the moment feels suffocating as the fines add up and the reality sets in that she's being punished for crimes she didn't commit.
Mrs. Jensen, did you contact the parking authority about this? Did you tell them your car was stolen? Her voice broke a little. She said, Your Honor, I called them 6 times. 6 times. I sent them a copy of the police report showing my car was stolen. I sent them a letter from my insurance company. They kept telling me I had to dispute each ticket individually, fill out forms, send in documentation. I did all of that. Every single time, they denied my appeal. They said the tickets were issued to my vehicle registration, so I was responsible. They said it didn't matter if someone else was driving it. I sat back in my chair. I could feel my face getting warm. I've seen a lot of bureaucratic nonsense in my time, but this was something else. This was a 73-year-old woman who had her car stolen, who had done everything right, who had reported it properly, and the system was punishing her for being a victim. I looked out at my courtroom and I could see people watching, listening. Everyone was silent, waiting to see what I would do. I said to her, Mrs. Jensen, let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your car was stolen on July 22nd. You reported it to the police immediately. You have a police report documenting the theft. Is that correct? She nodded. Yes, Your Honor, I have it right here. She pulled out a worn copy of the police report and handed it to me. I read through it carefully. It was legitimate. Filed at 9:47 a.m. on July 22nd. Stolen vehicle, Honda Civic, license plate number matching all the tickets. I continued. And after your car was stolen...
The judge carefully confirms the timeline, reviewing the police report that proves the car was reported stolen before any of the violations occurred. The woman explains how repeated calls, letters, and appeals were all denied. Watching this unfold, it's clear the system treated procedure as more important than truth.
After you reported it stolen, you started receiving these parking tickets and violations, all of them dated after the theft, all of them for locations you've never been to. At times you were home sleeping. She nodded again, tears now running down her cheeks. Yes, Your Honor, that's exactly right. I even called the police department to see if they'd found my car. They told me it had been recovered in September, about 6 weeks after it was stolen. It was impounded. But by the time they told me about it, the impound fees were over $2,000. I'm on Social Security, Your Honor. I live on $1,100 a month. I can't pay that. I can't pay these tickets. I didn't do anything wrong. Now, let me pause here for just a second. I need to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you did everything right, followed every rule, and the system still punished you anyway? Have you ever felt completely powerless against bureaucracy? Leave me a comment because I actually read them. And if you're following this story, hit that like button for me. I want to know I'm not alone in thinking this stuff matters. I looked at Christina. I could see she was upset too. I looked at the prosecutor, a young guy from the city attorney's office who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I said to him, Counsel, what's the city's position on this? He stood up, shuffled his papers. He said, Your Honor, the city's position is that the violations were issued to the registered owner of the vehicle. The parking authority has procedures for appeals, which Mrs. Jensen...
Attention turns to the city's prosecutor, who explains that appeals were rejected because the proper forms weren't completed for each ticket. The judge pushes back, questioning how a 73-year-old woman could reasonably navigate such a process. The exchange exposes how rigid rules can quietly become instruments of injustice.
...failed to properly complete. I felt my blood pressure rising. I kept my voice level but firm. I said, she failed to properly complete them. She sent you a police report showing the car was stolen. She sent you insurance documentation. What more does she need to do? The prosecutor looked uncomfortable. He said, Your Honor, the parking authority requires specific forms to be filled out for each individual violation, with original documentation attached to each one. I picked up the stack of 12 tickets. I said, So you're telling me that this 73-year-old woman who had her car stolen, who reported it properly, who did everything a citizen is supposed to do, she's supposed to make 12 photocopies of her police report, fill out 12 separate forms, and send 12 separate appeals. And if she doesn't follow that exact procedure, you're going to hold her responsible for tickets that were issued while criminals were driving her stolen car. The prosecutor shifted his weight. He said, Your Honor, those are the parking authority's procedures. I set down the tickets and I took off my glasses. I rubbed my eyes. I do that when I'm trying very hard to keep my composure. I said, Let me tell you something about procedures. Procedures are supposed to serve justice, not prevent it. Procedures are supposed to help people, not trap them in bureaucratic nightmares. This woman is a victim of a crime, and your procedures are victimizing her all over again. I turned back to Mrs. Jensen. I said, Ma'am, tell me about when they recovered your car. What condition was it in?
The judge delivers a firm rebuke of the system, stating that procedures exist to serve justice, not block it. He listens as the woman describes recovering her car in terrible condition and losing it for good. From a third-party view, the courtroom feels charged as compassion overtakes protocol.
Wiped her eyes with a tissue. She said, Your Honor, the police called me in September. They said they'd found my car, and it was in the impound lot. When I finally got to see it, I couldn't believe it. The seats were torn up. There was drug paraphernalia inside. The steering column was damaged where they'd broken in. My insurance company said it was totaled. They gave me $1,500 for it, but that was barely enough to buy another used car. And I still had to pay the impound fees to release it so it could go to the salvage yard. I felt something I rarely feel on this bench. I felt genuinely angry, not at Mrs. Jensen, at the system, at the bureaucracy, at the fact that we've created rules and procedures that hurt the very people they're supposed to protect. I looked at that prosecutor and I said, Here's what's going to happen. I'm dismissing every single one of these charges, every parking ticket, every moving violation, every citation, all of it. Gone. The courtroom was completely silent. Mrs. Jensen looked up at me with wide eyes. She said, Your Honor? I said, Mrs. Jensen, you were the victim of a crime. The criminals who stole your car, they're the ones who should be paying these fines, not you. The city's parking authority had clear documentation that your car was stolen, and they chose to pursue you anyway. That's not justice. That's not right, and I won't allow it to continue. I looked at the prosecutor. I said, You go back to your office and you tell them that Judge Caprio dismissed all of these charges with prejudice. That means they can't come after her for them again. You tell them that if they want to collect on these tickets, they need to find the criminal.
In a decisive moment, the judge dismisses every single charge with prejudice. The room goes silent as he explains that victims should never be punished for crimes committed against them. The woman's visible relief marks a turning point, as the balance of power finally shifts in her favor.
Who actually committed these violations, not a 73-year-old grandmother who did absolutely nothing wrong. Do you understand me? The prosecutor nodded quickly. He said, Yes, Your Honor. I understand. I turned back to Mrs. Jensen. Her hands were over her mouth. Tears were streaming down her face. I said, Ma'am, I want you to know something. You did everything right. You reported the crime. You tried to work with the system. You followed the rules. The system failed you. I'm sorry that happened to you. But today, in this courtroom, we're going to make it right. She could barely speak. She said, Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done. $1,800, I could never pay that. I said, You don't have to. It's over. The case is dismissed. You can go home. You don't owe the city anything. But I wasn't finished. I looked at Christina and I said, Get me the police department on the phone. I want to know what happened with the investigation into the theft of Mrs. Jensen's car. I want to know if they caught the people who did this." Christina nodded and left to make the call. I looked back at Mrs. Jensen and I said, "Don't go anywhere yet. Stay right here for a few minutes. I want to see if we can get you some more information about what happened." While Christina was making that call, I talked with Mrs. Jensen a little more. I asked her about her life. She told me she'd lived in Providence her whole life. She'd raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband passed away when she was 40. She'd worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. She'd worked in the school cafeteria during the day and cleaned offices at night.
Rather than ending there, the judge orders follow-up, asking about the investigation and ensuring the woman stays informed. As they speak, her life story comes out. Decades of work, raising children alone, and surviving hardship. The case transforms from paperwork into a deeply human story.
Her kids had all graduated high school, all made something of themselves. She had 7 grandchildren now. She showed me pictures from her wallet, her hands still shaking a little but her smile growing. She told me about her late husband. They'd met at a church social when they were both 17. He'd been a factory worker, a good man who worked hard and loved his family. When he died suddenly of a heart attack, she thought her world was ending, but she kept going for her kids. She kept working, kept fighting, kept moving forward. I listened to all of this, and I thought about my own father, my own family, the values I was raised with. This woman represented everything good about the working people of this city. Christina came back into the courtroom. She approached my bench and handed me a note. I read it and I felt my jaw tighten again. The note said that the police had actually arrested 2 individuals in connection with a string of car thefts back in September. Mrs. Jensen's car was one of 7 vehicles they'd stolen. The suspects were currently awaiting trial on multiple charges, including grand theft auto, possession of controlled substances, and various traffic violations. They'd been using the stolen cars to commit other crimes, driving around recklessly, parking illegally, running red lights, not caring about the consequences because the cars weren't registered to them. I looked at Mrs. Jensen and I said, "Ma'am, the police did arrest the people who stole your car. 2 men, both with long criminal records. They stole 7 cars total and used them to commit crimes all over the city. You were one of 7 victims."
The judge learns the car thieves were arrested months earlier, information never shared with the victim. This revelation highlights another failure of the system. Observing this moment, it's clear the judge is no longer just resolving a case, but confronting a pattern that demands accountability.
Victims. She looked shocked. She said, "I didn't know that. Nobody told me. The police never called me back after I filed the report." That right there, that's another failure of the system. When you're a victim of a crime, you deserve to know what happens with your case. You deserve follow-up. You deserve closure. I made a note to myself to send a letter to the police chief about this, but right now I needed to focus on Mrs. Jensen. I'm going to be honest with you. At this point, I was struggling to keep my composure, not because I was angry at Mrs. Jensen, but because I was angry at how the system had treated her. If you've ever felt that frustration watching someone get pushed around by bureaucracy, you know what I'm talking about. Hit that like button if you're still with me, and make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next, what I decided to do, goes beyond just dismissing tickets. I said to Mrs. Jensen, here's what else I'm going to do. I'm going to write a letter personally to the mayor and to the city council. I'm going to explain what happened to you and recommend that the city change its procedures. When a vehicle is reported stolen, that information should immediately be flagged in the parking authority system. No tickets should be issued to the registered owner for violations that occur after the theft is reported. That's just common sense. It's outrageous that this isn't already policy. Mrs. Jensen was crying again, but this time they were tears of relief. She said, "Your Honor, I can't believe you're doing this for me. Nobody's ever listened before. Nobody's ever cared." I felt a lump in my throat.
Moved by what he's seen, the judge announces he will personally contact city leaders to demand procedural changes. The woman, overwhelmed, realizes her fight may help others. The atmosphere shifts from quiet victory to the possibility of lasting reform.
I said, "Mrs. Jensen, I care, And I'm sorry it took this long for someone in the system to actually hear you. You deserve better. I asked her about her current situation. She told me that after the insurance payout and the impound fees, she'd been able to scrape together enough money to buy another used car, a 2006 Toyota Corolla. It wasn't much, but it ran. It got her to work and to the store and to church. She was making it work. But those $1,800 in fines had been hanging over her head like a dark cloud. She'd been having trouble sleeping, worried they were going to garnish her Social Security check. She'd been skipping meals to try to save money in case she needed to make payments. At 73 years old, she'd been living in fear because of something she didn't do. Before I tell you what else happened that day, let me ask you something. Do you think the system did right by Mrs. Jensen before she got to my courtroom? Do you think parking authorities should have the power to ignore police reports and pursue victims of crime? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you believe everyone deserves to be heard like Mrs. Jensen was heard, hit that subscribe button. After I dismissed all the charges, I did something I don't usually do. I stood up from my bench, I walked down the steps, and I walked right over to where Mrs. Jensen was standing. I took her hand in both of mine. I looked her in the eyes and I said, "You're a strong woman. You raised 3 kids on your own. You worked hard your whole life. You did everything right. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel like you did something wrong."
After court, the judge reflects on how the case stayed with him at home, discussing it with his wife and reaffirming why he still serves after 40 years. From an outside view, this reinforces that justice doesn't end when court adjourns. It follows those who care deeply about it.
Hear me. She squeezed my hand and she nodded. She said, "Thank you, Judge Caprio. God bless you." I said, "God bless you too, ma'am. Now you go home and you sleep well tonight, knowing this is all behind you." She gathered up her envelope, all those tickets that no longer meant anything, and she walked out of my courtroom with her head held higher than when she'd walked in. After she left, I went back to my bench. I looked out at the people still waiting for their cases. I could see on their faces that they'd been moved by what they'd witnessed. I said to everyone there, "Let me tell you something. That woman right there, Mrs. Jensen, she represents the best of what this city is. Hard-working people who play by the rules, who do the right thing, who deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. When the system fails people like her, we all need to stand up and say that's not acceptable. That's what I'm here to do. That's what this courtroom is for." The rest of that day, I couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Jensen. Between cases, during lunch, on my drive home that evening, her story stayed with me. I kept thinking about how many other people out there might be going through something similar, how many other victims of crimes were being punished by bureaucratic systems that couldn't see the forest for the trees, how many other elderly people on fixed incomes were losing sleep over fines they shouldn't have to pay. When I got home that night, my wife Joyce could tell something was on my mind. We've been married for 48 years, and she knows me better than anyone. She said, "Frank, what's bothering you?" I told her the whole story about Mrs. Jensen.
Letters are written, newspapers get involved, and city officials respond. The woman receives refunds, apologies, and long overdue closure. What began as a single case starts rippling outward, showing how one voice, when finally heard, can push an entire system to correct itself.
I told her about the stolen car, the tickets, the impound fees, the bureaucratic runaround. Joyce listened patiently, the way she always does, and when I was finished, she said something that stuck with me. She said, "Frank, that's why you do what you do. That's why you still put on those robes every morning after 40 years. Because people like Mrs. Jensen need someone who will actually listen." She was right. That's exactly why I do this. It's not about the power or the prestige or the title. It's about those moments when you can look someone in the eye and say, "I hear you, I see you, and I'm going to help you." Those are the moments that make 40 years on this bench worthwhile. The next morning I did what I said I was going to do. I wrote a detailed letter to the mayor explaining Mrs. Jensen's situation. I wrote another letter to the city council president. I wrote a third letter to the director of the parking authority. In each letter, I laid out exactly what had happened. I explained how the current system had failed a crime victim. I made specific recommendations for policy changes. I said that when a vehicle is reported stolen, that information must be immediately entered into the parking enforcement system. Any tickets issued after that date should be automatically voided. Any tickets already issued should be subject to a simple one-step appeal process, not the Byzantine maze that Mrs. Jensen had to navigate. I sent copies of those letters to the local newspaper, too. I wanted the public to know what had happened. I wanted there to be accountability. Within a week, I started getting responses.
New regulations are passed, informally named after the woman whose persistence exposed the flaw. At a city council meeting, she's publicly acknowledged. Watching this unfold, it's clear her quiet determination reshaped policy and protected future victims from similar harm.
The mayor's office called and said they were reviewing the parking authority's procedures. The city council scheduled a hearing to discuss reforms. The newspaper ran a story with the headline, "Judge Caprio Fights for Car Theft Victim." Mrs. Jensen's story was sparking change. About 2 weeks after that day in court, I got a phone call at my office. It was Mrs. Jensen. She said she'd seen the newspaper article. She said she'd gotten a letter from the parking authority formally notifying her that all charges against her had been cleared from the system. She said she'd also received a check refunding the impound fees she'd paid, along with an apology from the police department for not keeping her informed about the investigation. She was crying on the phone. She said, "Judge Caprio, I don't know how to thank you. You changed my life." I told her she didn't need to thank me. I told her I was just doing my job. But inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. I felt like the system had actually worked the way it was supposed to. Not on its own, not automatically, but because someone stood up and demanded it work right. That's what we all have to do sometimes. We have to stand up. We have to speak out. We have to demand better. You know what keeps me doing this job after 40 years? Moments like these. Seeing that justice doesn't have to be cold and impersonal. Seeing that a courtroom can be a place of compassion, not just punishment. Seeing that one person's story can change the system for everyone who comes after. If this story is restoring your faith in justice, show me by hitting that subscribe button and that like.
The judge reflects on letters from others helped by these changes, including people who finally had their own unjust fines dismissed. Each story reinforces the same truth. Treating one person with dignity can create justice for many more.
Button. Share this with someone who needs to see it. A few months after all of this happened, the City Council passed new regulations for the parking authority. They called it the Jensen Protocol informally, though the official name was something more bureaucratic. But everyone knew it came from Mrs. Jensen's case. The new rules required the parking authority to cross-reference their ticket database with police reports of stolen vehicles. They created a simple, single-form appeal process for victims of car theft. They mandated that the police department notify victims when their stolen vehicles were recovered and when suspects were arrested. I attended the city council meeting when they passed those regulations. I wanted to see it happen with my own eyes. When they took the vote and it passed unanimously, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. One woman's courage to keep fighting, to keep demanding to be heard, had literally changed the law. That's the power of not giving up. That's the power of believing the system can work if we make it work. Mrs. Jensen was at that meeting too. The city council president recognized her from the podium. He said, "Mrs. Jensen, your experience exposed a serious flaw in how we were treating victims of crime. Because of you, because of your persistence, we're making changes that will help hundreds of people in the future. Thank you for not giving up." The whole chamber applauded. I watched Mrs. Jensen stand up and wave, a shy smile on her face, and I felt tears in my own eyes. After the meeting, she came up to me. We stood in the hallway of City Hall, and she gave me a hug. She said, "Judge, my grandchildren asked me to..."
He considers the criminals responsible and the real human cost of their actions, emphasizing that crime is never abstract. From a neutral perspective, this moment reframes justice as accountability, not only for offenders, but for institutions that overlook victims.
Tell you thank you. They said their Nana is a hero. I laughed and I said, "No, ma'am, you're the hero. You're the one who stood up. You're the one who kept fighting. I just did my job." She smiled and she said, "Well, you did it well." I've thought about that conversation many times since then, about what she said, about being a hero. I don't think of myself that way. I think of myself as someone who was raised to believe in fairness, in justice, in treating people with dignity. My father taught me that. My mother taught me that. My faith teaches me that. And after 40 years on this bench, I've seen that those simple principles still matter, maybe now more than ever. Let me tell you something else that came from Mrs. Jensen's case. About 6 months later, I got a letter from a man in his 50s. He wrote to tell me that he'd been in a similar situation. His motorcycle had been stolen and used in multiple traffic violations before it was recovered. He'd been fighting with the city for over a year, getting nowhere. He wrote that after he read about Mrs. Jensen's case in the newspaper, he filed a new appeal citing the new Jensen protocol regulations. Within 2 weeks, all of his tickets were dismissed. He wrote, "Judge Caprio, thank you for standing up for the little guy. You saved me from financial ruin." I keep that letter in my desk drawer. I look at it sometimes when I'm having a tough day. That's what this work is really about. It's not about the individual cases, though each one matters. It's about the ripple effects. It's about how treating one person with dignity and respect can change the system for countless others. It's about believing that every person...
The judge challenges viewers to think about fairness, urging reflection on whether strict rules should outweigh common sense. The message is clear. Justice requires wisdom, empathy, and the courage to question broken systems.
Person who walks into that courtroom deserves to be heard, deserves to be seen as a human being, not just a case number. That's the lesson my father taught me, and it's the lesson I try to live every single day. I think about Mrs. Jensen often. I wonder how she's doing. I hope she's still driving that Toyota Corolla to work and to church and to visit her grandchildren. I hope she's sleeping better at night without that cloud of unjust debt hanging over her. I hope she knows that her courage, her refusal to give up, made a real difference. Not just for her, but for everyone who comes after her. There's something else I learned from Mrs. Jensen's case, something about how we've structured our systems of justice and government. We've become so focused on procedures and rules and regulations that we sometimes forget why those procedures exist in the first place. They exist to serve people. They exist to make society function better, to protect people's rights, to ensure fairness. But when procedures become obstacles instead of tools, when they hurt people instead of helping them, we have to be willing to question them. We have to be willing to say, this isn't working. This needs to change. That's harder than it sounds. Bureaucracies resist change. Systems have momentum. People say, we've always done it this way. But sometimes the way we've always done it is wrong. Sometimes we need a Mrs. Jensen to show us that we've lost our way. And sometimes we need judges and lawyers and elected officials and citizens to stand up and demand better. That's how progress happens. Not easily, not quickly, but it happens. I've also thought a lot about the two criminals who stole Mrs. Jensen's car. I don't know their names, I don't know their stories, but I know they made a choice to steal property that didn't belong to them. They made a choice to use that stolen car to commit more crimes. They probably never thought about Mrs. Jensen, never considered that there was a real person, a 73-year-old woman who needed that car to get to work, who would be held responsible for their actions. That's the thing about crime. It has victims, real people with real lives who suffer real consequences. When those two men go to trial, when they stand before a judge, I hope that judge considers Mrs. Jensen. I hope the prosecutor...
The story closes with the judge reaffirming his lifelong belief that everyone stands equal before the law. He explains that dismissing the tickets wasn't just legally right, but humanly necessary. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.